Our fifth story out front tonight. Now, before a big fight, boxer Muhammad Ali used to say, "We're going to get it on because we don't get along."
Rumble, young man, rumble.
That's right. And the same is true in political rivalries today. And after a bruising election year, our nation's star politicians are getting ready for some new fights in 2013. They're dusting off their gloves. They're getting back in the ring. And we have a front row seat and are here with an early look at the top 5 political rivalries that'll likely play out in the new year. Here to break them down, Reihan, Salam, Roland Martin.
I'm
Margaret
John
Hoover,
Avlon's
fight fan.
Brown.
I like that. I like that reference very much. Well, let's start up in the Bay State, because we've got a bitter fight from this election year, and you could see these folks serving again in the Senate. Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown. Let's take a look at some of their sparring this year.
I think what you're referring to is the fact that Professor Warren claimed that she was a Native American, a person of color. And as you can see, she's not.
Senator Brown wants to raise an issue about my character, then I'll lay it out there. You know, when I was growing up, these are the stories I knew about my heritage. I believed my mother and my father and my aunts and my uncles, and I never asked anybody for any documentation.
Well, I'll tell you guys, now, Scott Brown obviously lost that race, but with John Kerry going to state, Scott Walker's probably going to run the special in June. They could be serving together, Roland. What are you thinking about that?
She knocked him out like my man Manny Pacquiao got knocked out. Okay? So forget that. Trust me. It's
you don't think Scott Brown's coming back?
Dude, it's way too close after she beat him down in his last race. Trust me. He's if he runs.
Obama who dealt the knockout blow. It wasn't this candidate. She was a very, very weak candidate by any standard. She's beloved by progressives nationwide, but she won because Barack Obama was at the top of the ticket. Let's get real.
She was running against him.
Scott Brown has a 58% favorability rating in Massachusetts. It's very likely he's the Republican nominee. It is very likely he goes back to the Senate. And guess what? All's fair in love and war. They're going to be colleagues in the Senate. If that's true, they'll get over it. They will get over it.
John, when she loses, play that tape of Pacquiao getting knocked out and say that's Scott Brown right there.
I'll tell you what, this is going to be a fascinating race because Margaret's right. Scott Brown's still popular in Massachusetts.
But he lost.
Despite that, he's a Republican. Let's go to the next one. Our number 4 rivalry, Paul Ryan versus Marco Rubio. Two folks getting a lot of pressure, seen as the next face of the Republican Party, already making jokes about 2016.
Both parties tend to divide Americans into our voters and their voters. We must speak to the aspirations and the anxieties of every American.
One of the fundamental challenges before us is to find an appropriate and sustainable role for government in closing that gap between the dreams of millions of Americans and the opportunities for them to realize them.
Now, that was at the Jack Kemp dinner. They were joking about seeing each other at diners in Iowa, but they're both also making very conscious plays to have the GOP reach out to the middle class, reach out beyond their base, the repudiation of Mitt Romney. Are these two folks, these two rising stars on Capitol Hill on a collision course, Margaret?
No, this is a rivalry Republicans welcome. I mean, we want to see that Republicans duke it out. And by the way, add Bobby Jindal, add Ted Cruz, add Susanna Martinez, add Brian Stewart. I mean, bring it on. This is what the Republican Party needs in order to revive itself. And absolutely.
The real
battle will be Rubio, Ted Cruz, because they want to say, I can lock up Latinos, and so you want to be able to deal with me when it comes to the primary. That's going to be the real fight, because Cruz is, look, he's a Texan. He's going to come in slinging. He's going to walk in and say, Marco, you're not the only hot Hispanic in the United States Senate.
Rubio and Ted Cruz are very, very far apart, whereas Rubio and Ryan are saying much the same thing right now. That's why that's an interesting rivalry. They're both trying to craft this middle-class message, but they're doing it in subtly different ways, and I think Rubio has the inside track.
Let's do something a little even more topical, which is John Boehner and Eric Cantor. I mean, the atmosphere up on Capitol Hill has been like the Roman Senate for a long time now. These folks working together in leadership, but even over a year ago, Politico was running an article saying Boehner, Eric Cantor call for a truce, talking about after a year of bitter behind-the-scenes fighting against each other, their staffs were trying to find a way to work together. Now, Speaker vote's coming up January 3rd. Boehner just had a bad beating in that Plan B vote. So you don't think this is going to get better anytime soon, do you?
Well, I think the main thing that Boehner has going for him in this rivalry is that he has the worst job in the world. Eric Cantor is actually
really the worst job.
Well, look, he's certainly the worst job in Congress. Basically, Speaker Boehner has to sit there and eat a lot of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily want to eat, because there are a lot of Republicans who basically want to emote. They want to act up, and Speaker Boehner just has to take it and try to hammer deals. And Eric Cantor, if he goes into Boehner's role, suddenly he has to do the same thing that Boehner has to do right now, which stinks.
This is simple. The starting quarterback hates the #2 quarterback. And Boehner, if he was smart, he should have dispatched him a long time ago, and he should have said, young man, I'm going to put you out the pasture. You pull that crap on me again. He made a mistake after the debt ceiling.
But the truth is, the two of them are working very closely together in these negotiations. Boehner hasn't cut Cantor out, and Boehner's speakership, if you ask any Republican on the Roman Senate, if you ask any Republican on the Hill, nobody thinks Boehner's speakership is challenged.
That does seem to be conventional wisdom, but it only takes 17 votes for that whole thing to fall apart. And I'll tell you, I mean, Roland reminds me of The Godfather. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer.
It won't be Cantor who seeks that job, though. He knows it too well to want to take it.
That's a fascinating point as well. Now, number 2, we've got Grover Norquist versus the GOP. And here's what's fascinating. He has been a major player, a huge figure, and yet the pushback has been growing. The tide has been swelling. Take a look at this montage clip of Republicans pushing back on Grover Norquist and the ATR pledge.
I'm not obligated on the pledge.
When you're $16 trillion in debt, the only pledge we should be making to each other is to avoid becoming Greece.
I ran for office 3 times. The pledge was presented to me 3 times. I never signed the pledge.
He is becoming irrelevant, and you can see it in his eyes. He knows the game is up.
A pledge you signed 20 years ago, 18 years ago, is for that Congress.
But I'm going to be the one that determines what a tax increase is. Grover Norquist is not going to determine what a tax increase.
The message seems clear. Don't fear the Grover. That's coming. That's echoing throughout the upper echelons of the GOP, Margaret.
Boehner just put revenues on the table, and we've heard nothing from Grover Norquist. So I actually don't. I think this is a false drama. This is manufactured by people like you who can't stand Grover Norquist.
People like me. Just because the emperor's wearing no clothes, and I think it's worth pointing it out.
I think the fiscal cliff is a big deal here because it's kind of like a vampire and garlic. Because basically, once you go over the fiscal cliff, then suddenly tax rates go up so much that anything is a tax cut beyond that. The thing is that if you're actually raising taxes from a current policy baseline, then you might violate his pledge. But once they go up automatically, then cutting them from there, which could still mean higher taxes than what we have now, is not actually a tax hike.
Since he brought up True Blood, you mentioned The Godfather. Yeah. They need to treat him like Fredo.
All right, we got into number 1. I always appreciate a good Fredo Godfather reference. Number 1, going to surprise you, it's Hillary versus Hillary. And here's why, because she's got the whole Democratic field frozen up. Here's her denial, and then James Carville setting the record straight.
I've said I really don't believe that that's something I will do again. I am so grateful I had the experience of doing it before. But, I think there are lots of ways to serve, so I will continue to serve.
She's an extraordinarily able person. I never met anybody I thought was a better public servant, but I have no earthly idea what she'll decide to do.
Every Democrat I know says, God, I hope she runs. We don't need a primary. Let's just go to post with this thing. We don't want to fight with anybody over anything.
Wait, no, she's leaving state, but I hate fast forwarding to 2016. But the fact is, until she makes up her mind on what she does, the Democratic presidential field is frozen.
No, it's not.
No?
No, it's not.
Tell me why not.
Compare Hillary Clinton 2012 to Hillary Clinton 2008.
Oh, the
Remember,
inevitability.
She was inevitable. Everybody said, don't run. She's going to walk away with it. What happened? 4 years is a long time. So if James and the rest of the folks who are begging for her, trust me, she will. If she runs, she will not be running alone. She will have to fight in a primary.
I mean, but Margaret, are Republicans really quaking in their boots at the thought of Martin O'Malley or John Hickenlooper, your governor, or any of the other, Andy Cuomo?
I actually think Hillary Clinton deserves a year to take a deep breath and not have to worry about what. I mean, she needs to rest.
Yes,
Give her 2013. It's not Hillary versus Hillary, but I do think she ends up running.
I think Roland makes a fascinating point. I mean, who the heck knows what could happen and how things are going to shake up?
Well, that's a fascinating point. Fascinating conversation for 2013. We'll be right back.